So Jesus in the Disinherited book, a lot was going on. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really great book, and I'll get to like my main takeaways here in a bit. But I wanted to first off, I wanted to reflect on the book. So going through, I mean, in the first chapter, we see Thurman make a defense of Jesus being, as he calls it, a champion of the poor, or for the poor. And he gives a really good defense about it. He calls out that Jesus was a Jew and a poor one at that. I mean, Jesus was traveling around. I mean, many times in the book of John we see mentions of Jesus Jesus was a carpenter before his ministry. I mean, so he was probably making money then, but then we see him go away from that for the sake of ministry, which is a pretty good example of what we should do in ministry. So I really enjoyed that first chapter. The next chapter, the one when he talks about fear in the book, I really enjoyed that chapter. I mean, he points out that the disinherited, as he calls them throughout the book, are children of God just like everybody else. And faith, he brings up the idea of faith and how faith plays a major role in fear. And I think, I'm trying to think of the exact quote, I probably don't have it right, but in the chapter he talks about how fear is a real tool for the disinherited because of the fact that faith that they are children of God points out who they are, and that helps build up self-confidence and helps them fight back from fear. And the main part of fear is because the strong have made the disinherited weak. We persecute them, and that goes into the next chapter of just deception and how survival for the weak is based on deceiving the strong. I have a quote from the book right here. It says, "Deception is perhaps the oldest of all the techniques by which the weak have protected themselves against the strong. Through the ages, at all stages of sentient activity, the weak have survived by fooling the strong." Which, I mean, I totally agree with. I think that if you look in the history of the church or the history of just the world, you see that a lot. This chapter, in my opinion, calls out the church's congregants desiring to be wealthy instead of giving more to what Jesus calls us to do. Then we get to the chapter on hatred. That was probably by far my favorite chapter in this book. It lays out that hate is one of the biggest enemies of the church, yet Thurman seems to understand the temptation of hate. But he points it to Jesus and makes this statement in the book. He goes, "Jesus rejected hatred. It was not because he lacked the vitality or the strength. It was not because he lacked the incentive. Jesus rejected hatred because he saw what hatred meant. Death to the mind, death to the spirit, death to communion with his Father. He affirmed life, and hatred was the great denial." This chapter has to have had the biggest impact on me because, even as Christians, we choose to hate so often. And I mean, even though I don't seem to be finding myself hating people who are different than me, which is what the context of this is. I have hated people before, and just because of the way they've treated me and all that stuff. And Thurman helped me realize that in those moments, I need to look to Jesus and just look at the example Jesus laid out for us. And he did not hate, even as they were killing him. Jesus did not choose to hate when even the world hated him. And that reminds me of a passage in John chapter 15, verses 18 through 19, where it says, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you." And I mean, as the church, I feel like the world doesn't hate especially the American church. We don't face a lot of persecution because, quite frankly, we coexist with society a lot of the times, and that is something that I think really needs to change in the church because we need to be different. This book calls it the church needs to work on making sure that there's no chance for hate or prejudice in the church. This book was good Well, and a main theme that this book points out is that the church has failed in many contexts to discuss the disinherited people groups, especially African Americans, which I found really, really interesting, because that's something that we as a culture have struggled with the past couple of years. I think back to the summer of 2020 when race was a super political topic. It was a charged topic, and many churches didn't want to talk about it, because if you talked about it, then you would have to talk about the fact that there's a problem and that we need to fix the problem. And I think that's what many ways that the churches have failed. I think that the church should have done a better job of being more open and willing to have those conversations. Even if we don't necessarily agree with certain aspects of the movement, I think it's still good to have that conversation and be like, hey, this is why people are feeling the way that they are. We need to discuss that and work through that. Overall, this like I said, this book was just really good. I enjoyed reading it, and it was good for me because of the fact that I would not normally read a book with this context. It called out some things in me and also in the church that need to be fixed and need to be worked on. It's also just encouraged me to attempt to be more like Jesus every day, and just the way I treat other people and the way I treat myself. And I'm very grateful that I read this book, and I would definitely recommend it to those who are looking for a good challenge in trying to make sure that they're being the best Christians, especially when it comes to loving people who are a little bit different than us.